All right, welcome back to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we're going to cover some brain injury myths. And hopefully, by the end of this video, you will be well versed in these myths and also able to debunk these myths. A lot of them are self-explanatory to us brain injury case managers, but I do believe that it would be useful for us to know that these things do exist. There's multiple different editions for different kind of professions, and I think that would be useful. Um, the more knowledge that is out there, the better. And I think we could all debunk these myths together. So if you encounter one of these myths, it might be a great idea to to squash it, maybe debunk it for everybody out there. Like always, sources will be in the description below. We do appreciate good feedback. If you appreciate this video or you got something out of it, maybe you learned something new, give us a like, or maybe there's a brain injury myth out there that maybe you're not so sure on, or maybe there's a statement out there. Feel free to drop it in the comment section down below. I will find a way to debunk a myth or prove its truth. So, with that being said, we got a lot to cover. So, let's get into it. So, let's talk a little bit about the public health brain injury myths. First off, seat belts. They cause more damage to the brain than not. Well, that's actually patently false. I mean, you don't want to be going through a windshield if you are operating or riding in a motor vehicle or a heavy machinery, a piece of machinery. A seatbelt is a pretty good idea. Regardless of where you're sitting in the car, wear a seatbelt. Whiplash doesn't damage the brain, only the neck, which that is again patently false. The brain is a soft jello-like organ inside of a very hard, rigid skull with like spine on the inside. It's hard, and there is space for the brain to move. And when you get whiplash, the brain moves independently of the skull, and it hits the skull from all different angles. And so we know that is patently false. Traumatic brain injury does not cause damage unless there's loss of consciousness. Well, again, that is false. You do not have to lose consciousness in order to get a brain injury. In fact, you do get damage from a concussion when you don't lose your consciousness. So these are just generalized statements, but they can be very damaging to people's knowledge. If someone says, "Oh, I got a headache after hitting my head," chances are they might have hit their head a little too hard. So, with that being said, that is the public health edition. These are three basic myths, but um, let's move on and let's talk a little bit about adults and maybe some sports. All right. The first thing is mental health is not related to brain injury. Well, again, I tend to think that is patently false in all circumstances. Again, we do see that happening. I would point to the Concussion Legacy Foundation stories of how mental health and brain injury are tied together. And usually, when you get a brain injury, your mental health might be affected by the brain injury. Concussions only happen in certain sports like football, right? That is severely false. Concussions can happen in practically every sport, and some sports require you to wear a helmet, like hockey, football, NASCAR racing, or if you're in the military, you wear a helmet. Um, Certain jobs require you to wear a helmet. And not just those, but think about soccer when people hit the ball with their head. Think about hockey. Think about all these other sports out there. Concussions are, in fact, very prevalent in a lot of sports. And maybe we should start asking soccer players to wear helmets. Post-concussive, those post-concussive symptoms, they go away in a few months. Well, again, that is patently false. Um, Sometimes they will be persistent for many years after the fact. And again, point to the founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. And there's plenty of stories out there where after one bad concussion, typically those symptoms might not go away. So things vary from individual to individual. Every brain injury is very unique and they all heal differently and they all speak differently in a different way. Concussions in sports are rare. Well, that's far from the truth. Let me tell you, when you see those football players, clash into each other trying to move that ball forward, there might be a concussion in there. Although the technology is getting better, concussions are in fact quite frequent in sports. That's why wearing a helmet is very practical, very useful. Also, helmets are not really all that good, are they? Well, that's false. Helmets are in fact very helpful in preventing brain injury, especially the severe brain injuries. Think about helmets in motorcycles. It's not required, but it would certainly be a great idea to give you another layer of protection. Think about helmets for the military. That's a great idea, especially considering how things can be flying at you a lot faster. Think about helmets in football, helmets in NASCAR racing, helmets in hockey. Those are a lot of hits to the head, and it's great to have a very hard layer to maybe stop the blow and soft layers to help prevent it from getting into the brain. So let's talk about medical and nursing school edition. Again, these are sources. These are real sources talking about real misconceptions. So it is not severe when there's no loss of consciousness. Again, that's false. A brain injury can be severe even when there is no loss of consciousness. If you remain conscious the whole time, that does not mean anything different. That means that you did not lose consciousness. Just because you didn't lose consciousness does not mean that there is not a brain injury there. Some small brain damage, does that really matter? Again, um, we can look at it and say, well, actually, a small brain injury, is still a brain injury. A small concussion is still a concussion. That's something to think about because we shouldn't just phase it off as, oh, he'll be fine. All right. There could be further damage down deeper in there. And that's why it's important to know these things because just because, oh, he had a slight hit on the head does not necessarily mean that he is uninjured. So, post-traumatic brain injury, the brain will not have issues with learning. Again, that is false. And why is that? Well, your brain might have to rewire itself through something called neuroplasticity, where it has to rewire itself to correct or to avoid the damaged areas. And sometimes that affects your ability to learn. And that is something that maybe we could do a video on is there some statistics out there to talk about brain injury and learning? Oh, but recovery will happen quickly, right? Oh, they're going to get better in a few months. Oh, they'll be fine in a few weeks. That headache will go away. Again, that's false. Brain injury, a lot of times it takes a lifelong attempt at recovery, and sometimes that 100% will not be back, especially after some severe brain injuries like stroke, maybe anoxia, maybe an overdose. Recovery does not always happen that fast. All right, so let's talk about educators. All right, if you're an educator or your teacher, put that down in the comments below. But what are some myths that pervade the education space? Well, rehabilitation is quick for children and the youth. Well, that is patently false. In fact, the developing brain takes a lot more power to not only grow, but also to recover from a brain injury. So you might be hearing a lot from concerned mothers when their children are playing tackle football. Their concerns are in fact very real, especially because recovery might not be quick, especially if it is a really bad blow to the head. All right, brain injuries are less severe at a young age. That is false. In fact, they are more severe because the brain is still developing. The brain hasn't fully finished developing. Even take someone in their teenage years. That brain is still not fully developed and still is learning. There's a lot of growth that happens in the brain between the ages from birth all the way up even into the mid 20s. And that's why we can't forget about those who are younger. We shouldn't just ignore that they get brain injuries too. In fact, they're more severe at those ages. The second blow helps bring the memory back. Well, that's false. Again, that's another big falsehood. It, uh, do not cause a second blow, especially after they've had one. Try to prevent the first one in the first place, but a second blow to the head is never beneficial. All right, those with a brain injury are less likely to get another. Why? Because they know that they did something that made them get a brain injury. Well, again, that's false. In fact, quite the opposite is true. If you do get a brain injury, chances are you're more prone to get another one, and you're more prone for successive brain injuries as well. And so, what does this leave me as the brain injury case manager to conclude? Well, we need to be open to learn facts, but we should never assume. We should never assume with our clients. We should never assume with providers. We always need to be willing to learn the facts and the data, but we also need to be able to identify and squash these myths because these myths can be pervasive. Again, we've learned a lot. There's been a lot that's come a long way, but we should not assume that something is true. Every brain injury is unique. Every brain injury is special. Every brain injury will require special things, will require different things. And so that's where we need to take that person-centered approach. Also, these myths can be dangerous and they can lead to problems in the future. Again, we look at the helmet. Helmets are worn by the military. They're also worn by football players, by NASCAR drivers. They're even worn by NASCAR driver pit crews. If you're working in that pit crew, it's a great idea to wear a helmet. So, wearing a seatbelt is along the same lines. You should wear a seatbelt when you are in a moving vehicle. Click that seatbelt before that vehicle moves. As soon as you get in, get that seatbelt on. All right. And then these myths do not promote safety. And I've talked many times about preventing brain injury. Well, wearing a helmet when you're supposed to wear a helmet is a great idea. Wearing a seatbelt when you're in a vehicle is a great idea. You should do it. And also, these misconceptions do exist, but learning does also. We can learn, we can spread this information. Hopefully, this gives you enough information to maybe wash some myths. Maybe this might encourage you to do your own research. Maybe you hear something out there that doesn't sound right. Feel free to put it in the comment section down below. I love finding information about this, but hopefully, this gives you some education. Also, these are my resources. I hope you have a chance to look them up. And by the way, I hope you subscribe, maybe give us a like, maybe we do well on this, and feel free to put some feedback in the comments. But with that being said, I hope everyone has an absolutely wonderful day, and don't forget, protect your brains.